He had spent months learning to breathe again. After the divorce, the world felt heavier than it used to be. Every morning, he woke up to the quiet hum of his apartment and the memories that seemed to stick to the walls. He could still feel the arguments, the silences, and the sense of walking on glass that had defined the last months of his marriage. It was exhausting, and yet life moved forward, whether he wanted it to or not. He began small. He would walk to the corner cafe and sit by the window, watching people hurry past with their lives so full and bright. The barista knew him now and greeted him with a warm smile, a small gesture that somehow made the world seem a little less sharp. He would sip his coffee slowly, paying attention to its warmth, to the bitter sweetness that reminded him that even difficult things could bring a strange comfort. Work became a refuge. He focused on his projects with quiet dedication, letting the routine absorb him. His colleagues didn't pry, and that was exactly what he needed. Some days were harder than others. The empty apartment waited for him like a patient shadow, a reminder of the life he had lost. But he forced himself to keep moving, to take walks in the park, to hear the rustling of leaves and the laughter of children. Nature had a way of softening the edges of his pain. Evenings were the hardest. The quiet of his apartment was full of echoes. He tried reading, sometimes getting lost in stories that allowed him to escape for a while. Music helped, too. Certain songs reminded him of better times and made him feel both lighter and heavier at once. He would close his eyes and let the notes carry him, feeling the sting of memories, but also the promise that life had not ended. Friends became his lifeline. They checked in on him, sometimes awkwardly, unsure what to say, but he appreciated the effort. He realized that vulnerability was not weakness, even if it felt strange to ask for support. They would meet for dinners, or watch movies together, or just talk late into the night. It was not a replacement for love, but it reminded him that he was not alone. He had begun to understand that healing was not a straight path. Some mornings he felt lighter, hopeful even. Other days the grief would return uninvited, clinging to him like a shadow. But he learned to accept it. He learned to sit with his emotions instead of running from them, to let the tears fall without shame, and to forgive himself for mistakes, both his own and those of others. One Saturday morning, he went to the park with his camera. Photography had become a new passion, a way to capture beauty he had almost forgotten existed. The sunlight filtering through the trees, the soft laughter of a family playing, the quiet determination of joggers passing by, all of it reminded him that the world was still moving, still alive, still worth noticing. He snapped pictures slowly, savoring the small moments that once would have passed unnoticed. In these moments, he allowed himself to think about the future. Not the future as it had been planned in his marriage, but his own future. A future that was uncertain, yes, but full of possibilities. He could travel, learn new skills, meet new people, or simply find joy in the ordinary. The thought felt fragile, like a seedling in the soil, but it was enough to make him feel alive again. Yet the past lingered. Memories of his ex-husband were not always painful. Sometimes they brought a strange warmth, a reminder of love that had existed, even if it had not lasted. He thought about the arguments and the misunderstandings, and he realized that much of what had gone wrong was not entirely anyone's fault. Life had simply moved them along different paths. And clinging to resentment only chained him to sorrow. He started keeping a journal, writing down thoughts that were too heavy to carry silently. Each entry was a conversation with himself, a chance to untangle the emotions he felt. He wrote about the loneliness, the fleeting moments of joy, and the small victories he had each day. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to witness his own journey without judgment. He also began cooking for himself, something he had rarely done during his marriage. The act of preparing meals, of choosing ingredients, of savoring flavors he had forgotten he enjoyed, became another way to reclaim his life. It was simple, ordinary, but it grounded him in the present. Each meal he made was a quiet affirmation that he could care for himself, that he mattered, and that life still had sweetness to offer. Over time, he noticed subtle changes. He slept better, his appetite returned, and he started laughing more easily. He began to feel comfortable in his own company, no longer dreading the silence, but embracing it as a space to grow. The apartment no longer felt like a cage, but a home he could inhabit fully. One evening, he sat on his balcony watching the city lights flicker, feeling a calm he hadn't known in years. He thought about the divorce, about the pain, and the lessons it had brought. He realized he had grown stronger, more resilient, and more aware of what he truly wanted in life. The journey was far from over, but he could see the horizon. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a quiet excitement for what was ahead as he closed his eyes that night. He let go of the tension in his shoulders and the tightness in his chest. He breathed deeply, letting the air fill him with a sense of renewal. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and he didn't need to. For now he was here, alive, healing, and slowly rediscovering the joy of simply being himself. He understood that healing was not about erasing the past, but about learning to live fully despite it. And in that understanding, he found a flicker of hope, a gentle light guiding him forward. One day at a time. He had almost convinced himself that the world was slowly returning to normal. Days were no longer filled with tension or the constant weight of what had been lost. He was starting to find peace in the small routines he had built, the little rituals that reminded him he could be whole again. That is, until a knock came at his door one late afternoon. It was unexpected. A sharp sound against the quiet of his apartment. He frowned, wondering who it could be. Visitors were rare these days, except for the occasional friend or delivery person. When he opened the door, he found a man standing there who was both familiar and unfamiliar. It took him a moment to place him, but then he realized it was his ex-husband's younger brother. He hadn't seen him in years, not since the early days of the marriage. When things had still been hopeful, the man's face held a mix of hesitation and determination. He was carrying a small bag, as if he had traveled from somewhere. There was something in his eyes that told him this was not a casual visit, not a friendly drop-in. He could feel the tension coil in his chest. A warning from the past that not all encounters brought peace. "Hello," the brother said, his voice calm but slightly strained. "I hope I'm not intruding. Can we talk?" He paused, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to close the door, to protect the fragile peace he had worked so hard to build. But another part of him was curious, a small spark that wanted to understand why this man was here after all this time. "Come in," he said finally, stepping aside. The brother entered, and there was a brief silence as they both assessed the awkwardness between them. He led him to the small living room, offering a chair. Neither moved immediately, as if the air itself was heavy with unspoken thoughts. The brother set his bag down and looked around the apartment. "It's nice," he said softly. "You've made it your own." "Thanks," he replied, unsure what else to say. There was an awkward pause, the kind that carries years of unspoken words. He poured them both some tea, hoping the warmth of the cup might soften the tension. They sipped in silence for a few moments. The brother's hands were steady, but there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. Finally, he spoke. "I know this might be a shock," he began carefully. "I didn't know how else to reach you. There are things you should know, things about the past, about the divorce, about my brother." He stiffened slightly. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. He had spent months processing the divorce, and now someone was stepping in, promising to reveal parts of the story he had not known. He didn't know if he wanted to hear it or if he would regret it. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he said quietly. "I've been trying to move on, understand," the brother said, nodding. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't important. But please, just hear me out. I think it might help you understand things in a way that could bring some closure." He hesitated, then nodded. He had learned over time that closure sometimes came from listening, even when it was uncomfortable. He gestured for the brother to continue, leaning back slightly as if bracing himself for what was to come. The brother took a deep breath and began recounting small stories from their past, stories that the protagonist had never heard. He spoke about the pressures his brother had faced at work, the personal struggles he had hidden, and the moments of fear and doubt that had shaped his actions. Each detail was carefully chosen, not to excuse past mistakes, but to explain them in a human, imperfect way. He listened intently, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity playing across his face. Some stories were familiar, fragments he had remembered, but others were completely new, shedding light on events he had misinterpreted. He felt a mix of emotions: surprise, confusion, empathy, and even a strange sense of relief that there were explanations beyond the anger and heartbreak he had carried. The brother paused occasionally, as if unsure whether to continue. He could see the effect his words were having. The protagonist's expression shifted from guarded to thoughtful, his eyes tracing the patterns on the carpet as he processed the information. "There were things I didn't understand," he said finally, his voice low. "Things I thought were deliberate, but maybe they weren't." "That's exactly it," the brother said softly. "Most of it wasn't meant to hurt you. Life has a way of putting people in situations where they can't always make the right choice. I think if you knew everything, you'd see that my brother wasn't perfect. But he wasn't trying to destroy your life either." He felt a lump in his throat. It was strange to hear the story from someone else, to have the past reframed not as blame, but as complexity. It didn't erase the pain, but it softened the sharp edges he had been carrying for so long. They spent hours talking, moving slowly from one memory to another, untangling events that had once seemed like a tangle of malice and misunderstanding. He learned about moments of fear, private regrets, and unspoken love that had been hidden beneath arguments and frustrations. Each revelation added depth to the picture he had painted in his mind, a picture that had been incomplete and harsh. Sometimes he asked questions, seeking clarity. Other times, he just listened, absorbing the stories, letting them settle in a place in his mind that had been untouched for years. He realized that the brother's intention was not to reopen wounds, but to share a perspective he had never considered. And in that perspective, there was a strange sense of healing. The evening grew long, and the room was dim with the fading light. They moved to talk about lighter subjects, the brother sharing anecdotes about family moments that were humorous or touching. For a while, the tension lifted, replaced by a sense of connection that neither of them had anticipated. The protagonist realized he was beginning to see his ex-husband and the divorce in a new light, not through anger, through understanding. As the night deepened, the brother prepared to leave. He didn't say goodbye in a final sense, but rather with a quiet promise to continue the conversation when the time was right. The protagonist stood at the door, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The world outside seemed quieter, softer somehow. After he closed the door, he leaned against it, breathing deeply. The apartment felt different now, infused with the weight of the conversation and the clarity it had brought. He knew that healing was not a straight path, and that the visit had stirred old emotions. But it also brought a new perspective he hadn't expected. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. People moved through the streets, unaware of his small apartment and the quiet transformation taking place inside. He felt both small and significant, a single life intersecting with others in ways he could not control, yet ways that could bring understanding and growth. He sat down on the couch, replaying fragments of the conversation in his mind. Some details surprised him, others confirmed suspicions he had never voiced. He realized that the visit was not a disruption, but a step towards something he had been craving without knowing it: clarity, connection, and a deeper understanding of human complexity. For the first time in months, he felt that fragile spark of hope not only for himself but for his relationships with others. He understood that the world was not simply black and white, right or wrong, hurtful or kind. It was a mixture of intentions, mistakes, and efforts to do better, all wrapped up in human imperfection. He brewed another cup of tea and sat in the quiet, letting the warmth seep through him. He thought about the past, not with anger, but with curiosity and reflection. He understood that moving forward would not be easy, that forgiveness and comprehension were ongoing journeys. But he was ready to begin them. The knock at the door had seemed like an intrusion at first, but now it felt like a doorway to something new. He had faced a story he hadn't known, and it had opened a path to understanding and growth. As the night deepened, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, fragile but real. The past was still there, but it no longer dominated the present. And for the first time in a long while, he felt prepared to continue the journey of healing with an open mind and a cautious heart. The conversation with the brother did not end that night. In the following days, he found himself thinking about the things he had learned, the hidden layers of the past he had never seen. The more he thought, the more questions arose, questions that only the brother seemed able to answer. So when the knock came again, he did not hesitate to invite him in. This time, the air was less tense, though still charged with anticipation. They sat in the living room, teacups in hand, and the brother began to share more detailed accounts of events that had shaped his brother's behavior during the marriage. He spoke gently, with care, choosing his words to avoid blame while still conveying truth. He learned that during the marriage, his ex-husband had carried burdens he had never fully disclosed. Work pressures, family expectations, and personal doubts had all contributed to the conflicts that eventually tore them apart. The brother described nights filled with anxiety, mornings of hesitation, and moments of vulnerability that had never reached him. As he listened, a mix of emotions stirred within him: surprise at the things he had never known, sadness for the struggles his ex-husband had hidden, and, gradually, empathy for the human flaws and fears that had colored their shared past. Memories he had interpreted as intentional cruelty now began to look different. Framed by the context he had been unaware of, there were times when he asked questions, probing gently to understand better. The brother answered patiently, revealing small but significant details, conversations never shared, mistakes misunderstood, and moments of regret that had been buried under anger and distance. He realized that their divorce had not been simply about love lost, but about two people overwhelmed by circumstances they could not control. The dialogue stretched into hours. They moved from one memory to another, tracing the steps of past interactions with care. Each story added depth to what he thought he knew, painting a picture of his ex-husband not as a villain, but as a complex, imperfect human being. He felt his own heart softening, the hard edges of resentment beginning to blur at one point. The brothers shared a story from a time before the marriage had ended. It was a quiet evening, the two of them sitting on a balcony, talking about dreams and fears. He had seen a side of his ex-husband that was gentle, thoughtful, and deeply uncertain, but he had been too focused on his own pain to fully notice. Hearing it now made him realize how much had been lost in misunderstanding. The conversation took unexpected turns. They laughed over small anecdotes, shook their heads at misunderstandings, and sometimes sat in silence, absorbing the weight of the revelations. The protagonist felt a strange relief, as if years of tension were slowly unraveling. For the first time, he could consider the possibility that the past was not a simple story of hurt and blame, but a tapestry of human choices, struggles, and imperfections. He began reflecting on his own actions during the marriage, mistakes he had made, misunderstandings he had perpetuated, and moments when he could have been more patient or understanding. The brother's honesty gave him courage to face his own flaws without judgment. He realized that forgiveness, starting with himself, was necessary for healing. The brother also spoke of efforts his ex-husband had made to reconcile at times, gestures of care that had gone unnoticed or unappreciated. It was strange to hear these accounts, moments that had never been shared, but they revealed a humanity that he had overlooked in the fog of anger and pain. He felt both sorrow and gratitude, a complex mixture that was difficult to untangle but undeniably real. As the hours passed, they spoke about the family, about childhood experiences, and shared history that had shaped them all. The protagonist listened, absorbing the nuances of a story larger than himself, a story that included love, fear, mistakes, and resilience. The brother did not offer excuses, but understanding, and in that understanding, there was a quiet kind of reconciliation. He realized that this hidden story, the one he had never known, was not meant to hurt him, but to illuminate a truth he had been blind to. It was as if a curtain had been lifted, revealing the complexities of human behavior he had never fully appreciated. He felt a sense of compassion growing within him, not just for his ex-husband, but for himself, and for the shared human experience of struggle and imperfection. The evening ended with a long silence. They sat together, sipping their tea, both lost in thought. He felt lighter in some ways, yet heavier in others, carrying new knowledge and a deeper awareness of the past. But the heaviness was not painful, it was the weight of understanding, a weight that brought clarity rather than confusion. When the brother finally stood to leave, he did so with a quiet smile and a promise to return. The protagonist felt an unexpected warmth, a connection that had not existed before. A bridge between past and present, between pain and understanding. He closed the door slowly, leaning against it, and exhaled deeply. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights once more. The streets seemed alive, full of stories, full of lives intersecting in ways he could not see. He felt a renewed sense of possibility, realizing that life was not simply a series of endings, but a web of experiences that could lead to insight, growth, and even unexpected reconciliation. He settled on the couch, reflecting on the revelations of the evening. He thought about forgiveness, about the courage it took to listen without judgment, and about the resilience of the human heart. He understood that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about seeing it with new eyes. With empathy and understanding, he felt a quiet determination to continue this journey, to explore the hidden stories that shaped not only his life, but the lives of those around him. The conversation with the brother had opened a door, and he was ready to step through it, cautiously, but willingly, into a place where the past could be acknowledged, understood, and eventually laid to rest. As night deepened, he prepared for sleep with a sense of calm he had not felt in months. The hidden story had been revealed, and with it came clarity, a new perspective, and the beginning of a deeper healing. He realized that life, though complex and sometimes painful, also offered moments of understanding, compassion, and connection that could transform even the most difficult experiences into lessons of resilience and growth. He closed his eyes, feeling the day's revelation settle within him. The past was still there, but it no longer held the power to dominate his present. He was learning to see the world not just as a place of loss and hurt, but as a canvas of human stories, each with its own struggles, triumphs, and hidden truths. And in that realization, he found a quiet hope, spark of light to guide him forward. One careful step at a time, the visits from the brother became a regular part of his life. At first, he had been cautious, unsure of what to expect and how it might affect the fragile peace he had built. But over time, he began to welcome the conversations, the insights, and even the quiet moments of companionship. It was an unexpected kind of support, a bridge between the past he had lived and the understanding he craved. They spent afternoons talking about everything from family, memories, to the lessons learned from past mistakes. The protagonist found himself laughing more than he had in months. Discovering the humor in situations he had once only seen as painful, the brother shared small, personal anecdotes about his life, revealing moments of vulnerability that encouraged him to reflect on his own experiences without judgment. He began to notice changes within himself. The anger that had once been so present had softened, replaced by a deeper awareness of human complexity. He could see his ex-husband not just as a figure of hurt, but as a person shaped by pressures, fears, and personal struggles. It did not erase the pain, but it allowed him to view it through a lens of understanding and compassion together. They explored family history, discussing childhood experiences and moments that had influenced the way each of them navigated relationships. He learned about traditions, past regrets, and long-standing dynamics that had shaped their family. Listening to these stories, he realized that much of the tension he had experienced was part of a larger narrative, one that extended beyond his personal experiences. He also began to reflect more deeply on his own journey. He thought about the ways he had grown since the divorce, the routines he had established, and the small victories he had achieved. He acknowledged his mistakes and forgave himself for the choices that had been made in moments of fear or misunderstanding. The process of reflection was both challenging and liberating, allowing him to release lingering guilt and resentment. Cooking and writing became more meaningful. He experimented with new recipes, finding joy in the creativity of preparing meals for himself. Journaling became a place to process thoughts and emotions, to explore his evolving understanding of the past and the people who had been part of it. He wrote about the conversations with the brother, the stories he had heard, and the emotions they evoked. Each entry was a step toward clarity and self-awareness. One afternoon, the brother arrived with an old photo album. They sat on the couch together, flipping through pages filled with pictures of family gatherings, childhood moments, and celebrations long past. Each photo brought memories, some joyful, some bittersweet. He realized how much had been lost in the rush of life, how easily moments could be forgotten, and how valuable it was to preserve them. They talked about forgiveness, not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible practice. The brother explained how he had learned to forgive not just others, but himself, recognizing that holding on to blame only perpetuated suffering. These conversations resonated deeply. He understood that forgiving his ex-husband and himself was essential for true healing. It was not about condoning past actions, but about freeing himself from the weight of resentment. The apartment began to feel more alive. It was filled with laughter, conversation, and shared stories. The protagonist started inviting friends over more often, sharing meals and moments of connection. He discovered that opening his space to others was not a threat to his solitude, but an enhancement of it, a way to enrich his life while maintaining his boundaries. Evenings became opportunities for reflection and relaxation. He would sit by the window, watching the city lights twinkle as he contemplated the day's events. He thought about the past, the lessons learned, and the steps he was taking toward growth. Each night, he felt a little lighter, more capable of embracing the present, and more hopeful about the future. The bond with the brother evolved into a quiet friendship, one built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. They did not need to talk constantly. Sometimes simply being in each other's presence was enough. The protagonist realized that healing was not a solitary journey, but one that could be supported by understanding and empathy from others. Through these interactions, he also began to explore his own desires and dreams. He thought about hobbies he had neglected, adventures he had postponed, and goals he had set aside. The sense of possibility returned, fragile but persistent. He started planning small trips, taking up photography with renewed enthusiasm, reconnecting with friends he had lost touch with. Life began to feel expansive again, filled with opportunities rather than limitations. He noticed subtle shifts in his emotional responses. He could now hear a memory of the past without being overwhelmed by anger. He could recall a painful moment without it consuming his thoughts. The process of understanding the hidden stories allowed him to engage with his emotions in a balanced way. Acknowledging them without being controlled by them, the brother also encouraged him to consider reconciliation. Not in the sense of returning to the marriage, but in the sense of reconciling with the past. They discussed ways to release old grudges, to communicate with clarity and respect, and to embrace the lessons learned from the experiences that had shaped them. These discussions were challenging but ultimately empowering, giving him a sense of agency over his emotional life. He started to feel gratitude for the journey he had been on. The pain of the divorce, once all-consuming, now felt like a teacher, guiding him towards self-awareness, empathy, and resilience. He realized that growth often comes from discomfort, that healing requires confronting the past, and that understanding others can illuminate the path to understanding oneself. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life settled into a comforting cadence. He continued to meet with the brother, each encounter deepening his understanding and strengthening his emotional resilience. The past was no longer a shadow that haunted him, but a chapter that informed his present with wisdom and perspective. He began to plan for the future with intention. The apartment, once a space of solitude and quiet reflection, became a place of life, laughter, and connection. He envisioned travel, friendships, and experiences that would enrich his life. The lessons from the past were integrated into his daily choices, guiding him toward a balanced, mindful existence at night. He would sometimes lie awake, thinking about the conversations, the stories, and the emotions they had stirred. He felt a sense of completion, not as an endpoint, but as a stage in an ongoing journey. He understood that healing was continuous, that growth required patience, and that connection with others could be a powerful catalyst for transformation. Through it all, he felt a deepening sense of peace. The apartment, the city, the people in his life, the stories he had uncovered all contributed to a feeling of wholeness he had not experienced for years. He realized that life, even after pain and loss, could be rich, meaningful, and full of hope. He looked out the window one evening, the city lights glowing softly, and smiled. He had come a long way from the days of isolation and heartbreak. The visits from the brother had opened a door not just to the past, but to a fuller understanding of himself and the world around him. He felt ready to continue his journey, guided by insight, compassion, and the quiet courage that comes from truly knowing oneself. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he faced it with renewed strength, curiosity, and an open heart. Months had passed since the first unexpected visit from the brother. During that time, the protagonist had grown in ways he had never imagined. His heart, once heavy with resentment and grief, now carried a sense of understanding and acceptance that felt both new and familiar. He realized that healing was not a single moment, but a continuous process of learning, forgiving, and embracing life despite its uncertainties. The apartment that had once felt lonely, quiet, was now filled with small joys. He cooked meals that he shared with friends, laughter echoing where silence had once ruled. He ventured out more, visiting the park, photographing the world around him, and savoring moments of beauty he had once overlooked. Each day felt like a small victory, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The bond with the brother had deepened. Their conversations had moved beyond the past, touching on dreams, fears, and the possibilities of the future. They spoke about life openly, without pretense, sharing insights that encouraged growth and reflection. It was a rare connection, one built on honesty, empathy, and shared understanding, and it reminded the protagonist that relationships could heal even when they were unexpected. He began to think about forgiveness in a fuller sense. Forgiving his ex-husband and himself was no longer an abstract idea, but a lived experience. He had learned to release the heavy burden of blame, understanding that everyone makes mistakes and that understanding those mistakes can bring peace. The act of forgiving became a daily practice, subtle but transformative, affecting the way he viewed the world and his place within it. Life outside the apartment became richer as well. He reconnected with friends, pursued hobbies, and embraced new experiences. He traveled short distances, taking in new sights and sounds, and allowed himself to feel the joy of curiosity and discovery. Each adventure, no matter how small, reminded him that life was still full of possibilities, and that the past, while significant, did not dictate the present. The protagonist also became more attuned to the emotions of those around him. Conversations with colleagues, friends, and even strangers carried more depth. He noticed subtleties, gestures, and unspoken feelings that he had previously overlooked. His own empathy grew, a reflection of the understanding he had cultivated through his journey of healing. He began to see that everyone carries unseen struggles, and that kindness, patience, and listening could be transformative. The lessons from the brother and the stories of the past continued to resonate. He thought often about the complexities of human relationships, the ways in which fear and misunderstanding can drive people apart, and the courage it takes to face the truth without judgment. He realized that the past, though painful, had shaped him into a more thoughtful, compassionate person. Capable of both love and understanding, he began to plan for the future with a newfound clarity. Goals that had once felt distant now seemed achievable. He considered learning new skills, deepening existing hobbies, and cultivating relationships that nurtured his growth. Each decision was informed by the lessons he had learned: the importance of empathy, the value of self-reflection, and the power of connection. The future felt like an open canvas, waiting for him to shape it with intention and care. The protagonist also embraced solitude in a new way. Being alone no longer meant loneliness or emptiness, but a space for reflection, creativity, and self-discovery. He wrote in his journal regularly, capturing thoughts, emotions, and insights. Photography remained a source of inspiration, allowing him to freeze moments of beauty and meaning. In these activities, he found peace and fulfillment, a balance between connection and independence. He thought about the journey he had been on, the steps he had taken from grief to understanding. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but each challenge had contributed to his growth. He recognized that healing is ongoing, a continuous practice of self-awareness, acceptance, and compassion. The journey was far from over, but he felt prepared to face it with confidence, patience, and an open heart. The bond with the brother remained a source of strength. They continued to meet, sometimes for long conversations, other times simply to enjoy each other's presence. Through these interactions, he understood the importance of human connection, the ways in which understanding and empathy can bridge even the deepest divides. It was a reminder that relationships, even unexpected ones, could provide guidance and support on the journey of life. One evening, sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. The memories of the divorce and the painful moments of the past were still present, but they no longer dominated his thoughts. He felt a sense of balance, a harmony between remembering and moving forward. The past had shaped him, but it did not define him. He was free to create a life filled with meaning, joy, and connection. He reflected on forgiveness once more, recognizing it as a gift he gave to himself as much as to others. The act of letting go of resentment had lifted a weight from his shoulders, allowing him to breathe more freely, to live more fully, and to embrace the possibilities of the present and future. Each day he felt a little lighter, a little stronger, a little more capable of loving and being loved. As he prepared for bed, he felt a quiet contentment. The journey had been difficult, filled with unexpected challenges and revelations, but it had led him to a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. He had learned that healing is not linear, that understanding is earned through patience, and that connection can transform even the most painful experiences into opportunities for growth. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the day's reflection settle within him. The apartment was quiet, but not lonely. The city outside continued its rhythm, indifferent, yet full of life. He felt aligned with the flow of existence, aware of the past but not constrained by it. He understood that life was a series of moments, each offering lessons, joys, and opportunities to grow. With a sense of calm, he allowed himself to sleep, trusting in the journey he had undertaken. The past was a teacher, the present a canvas, and the future an open horizon. He had learned to embrace life fully, to understand deeply, and to forgive sincerely. And in that understanding, he found a sense of peace, a quiet strength, and the courage to move forward with hope, compassion, and an open heart, ready to live the life he had reclaimed for himself. The months following the last conversation with the brother were filled with quiet transformation. The protagonist felt a calm he had not known in years. Each day brought subtle reminders of his growth, the way he smiled more easily, how he approached challenges with patience, and the ease with which he now connected with people. Life had become a rhythm of mindful moments, small victories, and gentle discoveries. One morning, he woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. The apartment was bright with sunlight, and for the first time in a long while, he moved through the space without hesitation or sorrow. He made coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, and sat by the window, watching the city come alive. People hurried along the streets, each absorbed in their own worlds, and he felt a quiet connection to them, a shared humanity that was both comforting and humbling. The brother's visits had taught him that understanding others could lead to understanding oneself. He thought about the past with clarity, acknowledging the pain of the divorce while recognizing the lessons embedded in it. Each memory was no longer a wound, but a guide, illuminating the ways he had grown, the resilience he had discovered, and the empathy he had cultivated. He took a long walk in the park that morning, noticing the details he had once overlooked, the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children playing, and the soft footsteps of joggers passing by. All of it reminded him of the beauty of ordinary life. He paused to photograph a flower catching the sunlight, realizing that small moments of attention could bring profound peace. Life was not defined by grand gestures alone, but by the accumulation of these quiet, meaningful experiences. As the day unfolded, he reached out to friends he had not spoken to in months. They met for lunch at a small cafe, sharing stories, laughter, and updates on their lives. The connection felt effortless, a contrast to the strained relationships he had once maintained. He noticed how his own openness had changed the way others responded, creating a space of mutual trust and understanding. Relationships, he realized, were built on honesty, patience, and shared vulnerability. Later, he returned to his journal, writing about the journey that had brought him to this point. The words flowed easily, a reflection of his inner clarity. He wrote about the divorce, the arrival of the brother, the hidden stories, and the slow unraveling of anger into understanding. Writing became a form of meditation, a way to process his experiences and solidify the growth he had achieved. He reflected on forgiveness again, this time with a deeper comprehension. Forgiving his ex-husband and himself had freed him from the heavy burden of past mistakes. It was not a singular act, but a daily practice, a conscious choice to release resentment and embrace compassion. Each time he encountered a memory that once brought pain, he now met it with a balanced heart. Acknowledging the past while remaining grounded in the present, the apartment, once a place of solitude, had become a haven. He filled it with objects that brought him joy: books, photographs, small pieces of art. Each item was chosen with intention, a reflection of his renewed love for life. He realized that caring for his environment was a way to care for himself, creating a space that nurtured growth, reflection, creativity. Evenings were moments of quiet reflection. He would sit on the balcony, watching the sun set behind the city skyline, feeling the day's experiences settle within him. The past no longer haunted him. It informed him. He had learned to embrace complexity, to understand the nuances of human behavior, and to approach life with a compassionate heart. Each sunset reminded him that endings could be beautiful, and that each day held the promise of renewal. The bond with the brother had evolved into a steady friendship, one built on trust, honesty, and shared understanding. They continued to meet not out of obligation, but because the connection enriched both their lives. The protagonist recognized that relationships could be healing when approached with empathy and openness, providing support without dependence and guidance without judgment. He also began to explore new ambitions. He enrolled in a photography course to refine his skills, joined a local community group focused on creativity, planned small trips to places he had longed to see. Each endeavor was a step toward embracing the fullness of life, a way to engage with the world beyond his own thoughts and reflections. Possibilities once distant and uncertain now felt within reach. He noticed subtle changes in how he interacted with others. Conversations were more meaningful, listening more attentive, and responses more thoughtful. He understood that everyone carries hidden struggles, and approaching life with kindness could have a profound impact. Empathy had become a natural part of his interactions, not forced, but ingrained in the way he related to others. As weeks turned into months, he continued to integrate the lessons of the past into his daily life. He balanced solitude with social interaction, reflection with action, and mindfulness with spontaneity. Life no longer felt overwhelming or empty. It was rich with possibility, filled with moments of beauty, learning, and connection. He had learned that healing was ongoing, not linear, but achievable through patience, understanding, and compassion. One day, he received a message from the brother, suggesting a visit to a quiet cafe by the river. They spent hours talking, sharing experiences, and reflecting on how far each had come. The conversation was filled with laughter, insights, and comfortable silences. He realized that this connection had not only helped him understand the past, but it also equipped him to embrace the future with confidence and joy. He returned home that evening feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Life had been unpredictable, filled with challenges and surprises, but it had also offered opportunities for growth, understanding, and renewal. He recognized that pain and joy coexist, that struggles can lead to wisdom, and that human connections are vital for resilience and happiness. As night fell, he sat quietly in his apartment, reflecting on his journey. The divorce, once a source of despair, had become a catalyst for transformation. The arrival of the brother, the hidden stories, and the conversations that followed had illuminated paths he had not seen before. Each experience had contributed to a richer, more nuanced understanding of himself, others, and the world. He felt a sense of completion, not as an endpoint, but as a stage in an ongoing journey. Life would continue to present challenges, joys, and lessons, but he was prepared to meet them with a balanced heart, curious mind, and a compassionate spirit. He understood that healing is not about erasing the past, but integrating it into a life that is meaningful and fulfilling. Before going to bed, he looked out the window at the city lights. The streets below teemed with life, each person carrying their own stories, joys, and struggles. He felt a quiet connection to this vast, intricate web of human experience. Life, he realized, was a series of moments, each offering an opportunity to learn, to grow, to connect. He closed his eyes, letting the day's reflections and the lessons of the past settle within him. The journey of healing had brought him to a place of understanding, peace, and readiness for the future. He felt aligned with the rhythm of life, aware of the past but not constrained by it. In that awareness, he found strength, hope, and the courage to continue moving forward, embracing each new day with openness, gratitude, and a heart fully alive.